Hello viewers, welcome back to our YouTube channel. We are continuing with our study on the anthology A Silent Song and Other Stories. Today our focus will be on the story A Silent Song. A Silent Song. The style that has been used at the title of that story, A Silent Song, is an oxymoron. An oxymoron is the stylistic device whereby two contradicting words or words with the two contradicting ideas are used in the same sentence. We do not expect a song to be silent. Song is always loud. Remember to stay with us up to the end of this video as we unravel the silent song in this story. This is a story that tries to talk about how disease and the street life dehumanizes human beings. It is a story told in the limited, omniscient narrator's voice as the point of view. The point of view or the narration voice is the limited narrator's voice in the sense that the writer or the voice that tells this story is omniscient, that is a know-it-all voice, but at the same time, it focuses on the main character. The main character of the story is one Manny. The story begins when Manny is on his sickbed. It begins in what we may call the medias res. That is to say, it does not follow the traditional linear plot of events in stories. In most stories that follow the linear plot, we expect that the events begin from point A, B, and then C. But in the story A Silent Song by Leonard Kibera, drawn from Kenya, we see the story begin when Manny, the main character, is on his sickbed. The description, the diction that is used at the beginning of the story tells us how fatal the disease is. Fast forward, the narrator, through the use of flashback, falls back to the previous life of Manny, the central character. We are taken to the streets of a city where Manny really gets the scourge of the street life. We realize that he remembers his city life with nostalgia. At the city, he lives on the streets and he is at the mercy of pedestrians whom he begs for. After that, then we are brought back to Manny's hospital bed. At Manny's hospital bed, which we realize that is at his brother's, that is Ezekiel's, heart. That is where we meet a keen, observant, yet silent man. From the surface, it appears as if Ezekiel, together with his wife Sarah, tend to care about Manny, but keenly looked at, Manny gets to realize the hypocritical nature of his brother Ezekiel and his sister-in-law Sarah, who are professed Christians. Just true to how fatal the symptoms of Manny's disease proved at the introduction of this story, Manny finally dies, though he dies with a silent song in his heart, a silent song about hope, about a future. He hopes that one day his soul is not going to be incarcerated either in the streets or back at home on his sickbed. That is typically the plot of the story A Silent Song by Leonard Kibera. I want us to spend a few minutes talking about the dehumanizing effects of the two subjects dealt with in this story. That is how a disease can dehumanize a human being, as well as the street life. That is an emerging issue in our cities today. But before that, viewers, if you are visiting us here for the first time, remember to like, subscribe, and share so that anytime we put up our videos, you will be the first one to be notified. Let's continue. A disease ordinarily is dehumanizing. It is dehumanizing in the sense that it hampers our normal functioning as an ordinary human being. That is what is presented in Leonard Kibera's A Silent Song. In using Manny as the central character, Leonard Kibera introduces the story as this character gropes towards the door of the heart, showing how disease has made him to be helpless. He crawls weakly on his knees and elbows. He cannot support himself. His movement has been greatly hindered by the disease. He also feels pain all over his body. And the pain in this instance is personified. The pain has been given the human attribute of gathering violence, just to show how fatal this disease could be. We are also told through the use of vivid description that the onslaught of the pain on Manny is savage. There is a sharp pain from his navel that tears through his body. In trying to grope towards the door, he hits his forehead on the dirt of the flea-ridden floor. That also tells us something about how poor this family is. That is the caretaker family of Manny, that is Ezekiel and Sarah. Manny is hungry and he cannot perceive day and night, time, or beauty. All these become imperceptible to him in the gloom of his night of suffering. The disease has been metaphorically compared to a gloomy night. All these show how the disease, of which we are not told which type of a disease, tend to dehumanize Manny. Finally, the helplessness of man when it comes against a disease, we see finally on page 20 as Manny finally dies. Another thing that dehumanizes in this story by Leonard Kibera is the street life. In most cities around the world, there is an emerging trend of young children, the age 14 and below, are trying to make their ends meet in the streets. This is what also happens in the Kenyan city where the story A Silent Song is set. Manny finds himself in the street as a street urchin. And there he becomes a beggar, as shown in page 18. In page 18, we see him become a beggar. It reads, pedestrians would sing to the blue sky, whistle to the gay morning as their footsteps sang their way down the pavement, and this would taunt him. Still, he would be happy, for it was the gay people who mostly answered his plea. He had come to know how many was the essence of urban life. Dull people, heavy, tired footsteps and voices betrayed anxiety, empty pockets. We see Manny begin to beg. So the begging that Manny resorts to in order to survive after he realizes how money is essence in an urban area is one instance on how the street life gets to dehumanize him. Apart from begging, Manny has one friend, and the friend is found in solitude. He gets to live a solitary life in a gay environment. Every time pedestrians pass by him, singing to happy tunes, loving the beautiful sky, but he always has himself, to an extent that Manny keeps speaking to himself. Whatever conversation that Manny has is kind of a monologue. And this one comes out when finally on his sickbed, when his brother Ezekiel has rescued him from the city. And Ezekiel tends to ask him this question that, Manny, do you believe in God? Ezekiel asks. He sees no reason why his brother should ask him this. He only answers to himself, I don't know. I don't think it matters. And before we get to that point, that is on page 19, the writer makes this statement. All his life, He had been speaking to himself in his thoughts, and for a long time on the streets, except for his mechanical plea of yes, he had no one to address but himself. Now, if anyone spoke to him, he could only carry the subject on a line of uncommunicating thought in his mind. This shows how the street life has broken down Manny to a point that he cannot engage anybody in a conversation, and all his conversations are mere monologues. It is also very interesting to see how the street life blurs the vision, narrows the vision of man. When he remembers the street life with nostalgia, then we are told, like in page 18, that somehow, however, he, Manny, did recall city with a kind of nostalgia. Not that he really knew it. In fact, he had earned his living on one street only, retiring to the back lane when the street became deserted. So then, it is very interesting how Manny is in a city. In most African states, cities are seen as centers of opportunity. These are the areas where people who are looking forward to a good life run to. But according to Manny, thriving in a city of opportunity, he seems not to be aware of his surrounding past the street where he begs and the back lane where he goes to sleep. So then it is very interesting to see how the street life dehumanizes Manny in the sense that it gets to blur his vision and to limit him at the city. Another instance is the imagery of the flies crawling around the edges of his slaves, maybe to imply the kind of poor hygiene that Manny finds himself in the streets. We see a statement made in page 19 by the writer that he could tell this too in the way the authority in the city handled him. It sometimes surprised Manny that the big vehicle which emptied the dustbin had never swept him away in the raucous noise. This brings out the idea that Manny compares himself to the filth that is in the dustbin. And that could be the evidence as to the fact that the flies crawl around his lips. That is quite a dehumanizing picture. After finishing work, and work for Manny in this instance is begging on the streets, he retires back to his home. Of course, the home in quotes. His home is the back lane of the street where he begs. And getting to that point, there he is met by the hostile cold. He gets to surrender his vulnerability to sleep, and at the back lane where he finds his night rest, he is unsheltered, but he is undisturbed. So these are some of the factors how the street life gets to dehumanize Manny. It is very interesting that we also get to peer at the characterization of Ezekiel and Sarah in this story. Manny is keen and observant to go beyond the obvious, to find out that inasmuch as Sarah and Ezekiel, who are his caretakers during this time of ailing, in as much as on the surface we may tend to identify with them as readers and see and thank them how they are taking good care of Manny. Manny realizes that they are hypocritical and whatever they're doing is a total charade. Let's look at some of the statements that implies the hypocritical nature of Sarah and Ezekiel. On page 18, we see Manny thinking about his new life away from the streets of the city. His brother, who is a preacher, has picked him up from the street, bringing him to his heart, which feels so serene, yet so suspicious. There is suspicion on the part of Manny. He's suspicious that inasmuch as Ezekiel and his wife appear to be for his good, there seems to be something that could be in the cupboard. It was not just the lack of urban ruggedness and noise or the lack of quick footsteps of busy people prancing away fitly to business he never understood, but who would occasionally answer his plea to keep him alive with a drop of copper in his heart. His brother also develops a kind of cold and indifferent attitude towards him during his sick days. He could tell that there was meaning in his brother's silence of late. Something strange and yet perhaps well-intentioned in his voice when he spoke. He could tell it too when his brother repeatedly said, "I rescued you from that barbaric city so that you can see the light of God." Upon Ezekiel rescuing, because later on we see the writer put the word rescued in a quote that is on page 19, which reads, she, that is Ezekiel's wife Sarah, withdrew after laying him on the bed to which he had tried to accustom himself since being rescued from the hard pavement on the streets. He uses, that is Ezekiel, tries to use his heroic act of bringing Manny from the street life back home when he starts ailing as a way to manipulate him. And that is why towards the end of the story, Ezekiel tells Manny that the same way he rescued him from the streets, he also wants to rescue him from the snares of Satan and to bring him back to God. He becomes angry, he is act and chagrined in equal measure as we see him hissing to Manny in suppressed anger when Manny refuses to buy into his kind of recruitment into Christianity. So he's this manipulative person. he's judgmental. And for some of our audience who have had the opportunity of reading Ngugi wa Thiong'o's The River Between, he could be synonymous to Joshua in that text or in that story. This kind of a person who does something to someone and then he tends to use that as a way to blackmail, intimidate the other person into doing whatever he wants.